that property of fork it and go is the property that people describe when they talk about freedom.
Yeah, welcome to you as well, Miko.
Yeah, sounds good. And, happy to get started, with anything.
Awesome. So, I did a little bit of research about you, and I think your story is quite incredible. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, starting of your journey, right? Like, you spent most of your time working on open source softwares, but I would like to hear more. How has this journey been?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like someone the other day said, hey, how do you become an overnight success in crypto? So my answer was, you have to find like a really kind of a low margin business like open source developer tools, and then you pretty much have to work there for maybe 25 or 30 years, and then the rest is almost automatic.
I can't believe people can ask such questions, but you spend 25, 30 years, just doing open source software, and I'm sure it's highly, not even like people don't really care about it as much, but it's very important. So how was it working 25, 30 years at open source software? What made you still do that, even when there are opportunities which pay way more, or available? So why did you stick to open source software?
Yeah, to me, like, I really feel like open source software, like, I think Vitalik talks about projects that have a soul, and he says that's a competitive advantage, right? And the thing that is important about open source software is that open source software is inherently nonviolent, right? And the question becomes, what does that even mean? What does it mean that it's nonviolent, right? So if you look at the history of software, right, effectively proprietary software is sort of used as a coercive weapon, right? So I actually sold a company that had open sourced enterprise integration software, and we ended up being acquired by an enterprise integration company called Web Methods, and then we ended up selling Web Methods to a company, a mainframe database company in Germany called Software AG. And, I actually went down to Brazil with that company, and we ended up getting $100 million software license from the Bank of Brazil. And this was for a mainframe database that had been installed probably about 30 years ago. So, so the thing that was incredible was kind of understanding how much leverage proprietary software has, in terms of coercive power, right? Because we basically went down there and said, you guys are not in compliance with your license, and we're going to shut you off. We're going to turn off your bank, right? if you don't pay us, a huge sum of money, right? and obviously, if that were open source, we would not have had the power to do that, right? So in a sense, like, having experiences like that make you realize that a lot of the power, that comes from these companies, comes from having a very sticky, useful product. I asked the CEO, Karl-Heinz Streibisch, it was a German company. I asked him, like, how can you kind of justify getting that kind of money, and he basically said, well, if you write software that runs a bank that does, a billion transactions a day and still runs 30 years later, I'll pay you $100 million, right? So I think he had an elaborate justification. But for me, what happens with open source software is that, getting back to nonviolence, the idea of open source software is what I call unilateral preemptive disarmament. right? And in a sense, like, I think it was Munib from Blockstack who sort of coined the phrase "can't be evil," right? And the thing that's interesting about that is that in large extent, that attribute comes from the open source property, because it is preemptive and unilateral disarmament, in the sense that you show up and you say, I can't coerce or manipulate you because you can always fork it and go, right? So that property of fork it and go is the property that people describe when they talk about freedom, right? So they talk about censorship resistance. Obviously, that's conferred by pseudonymous privacy. It's conferred by cryptographic security. So there's other attributes of blockchain that I think are meaningful. But I would say that, one of the extremely meaningful ones is this kind of nonviolent quality, which enables or empowers counterparties to effectively fork it and go, right? And if you can fork it and go, it means that you have individual freedom, right? And I think individual freedom is something that I think right now is being sort of pushed. Right now, where the world is in a conflict, and it's a sort of a conflict of sort of individual freedom, represented by autocracy, right, against kind of collective freedom, represented more by international order, right? And so, it feels like this kind of pressure that we're feeling, is testing the limits of individual freedom, and testing the limits of collective freedom, right? So in collective freedom, a group of people, make the rules together, right? And in autocracy, obviously, there's a single person who makes all the rules, and basically there are no rules, right? So in an autocracy, it's just somebody doing whatever they want, right? And so, to me, when you think about the idea of fork it and go is a mechanism that allows people to have individual freedom, right? So if there's anything about any situation that you dislike, you can basically fork the entire situation, and you can change the thing you don't like, and then that's it, and you can go. And the thing that's beautiful about it is anyone else can go with you, right? So if they like your way the best, then they'll go volunteer to go with you. So happy to turn it back over to you, but plenty to say on this particular topic.
No, this is pretty interesting, right? Like, you brought up a lot of mental models, which I think like we'll make clips of, and this phrase "fork it and go," I think it's gonna stick around the more we talk about it. Hey, you don't like this project? Just fork it and just make your own thing, which we've seen happen a lot in DeFi and like our ecosystem, and even talking about like Bitcoin, the early days, right? Like, there was a soft fork, there was a hard Ethereum, like people just created new chains when they didn't like the consensus mechanism. So I just before we get into that, I want to I see where like your philosophy, you really like crypto, because like it's open source, and like that's what you've been like. But like, tell us, how did you get into this industry, like your early days? Miko, you're muted.
Yeah, so my career has been fairly nonlinear, and I go through these tunnels, these kind of dark tunnels, and there's a bunch of different things that cause this dark tunnel to be a particularly strange and dark. But like, I guess two things. One of them is sort of the psychological dimension, which is, that's kind of undergoing a really deep sort of soul-searching personal transformation. So that's one story, right? But I think the other story is closer to the idea of just the technological familiarity, right? Which is, I joined an open source object database company called Hazelcast, and Hazelcast was a distributed database and in memory, and so it did ultra fast financial transaction processing. So it literally was open source financial infrastructure, right? And it used by banks and used by Apple and used by many kind of famous companies for high throughput transaction processing, right? So the creator of this open source database, Talib Ozturk, this database was part of the NoSQL, so-called eventually consistent. So if you know Brewer's cap theorem, it's an AP database. For those of you who are kind of not database wonky, like it just means that it arrives at what's called eventual consistency, which is that you have a bunch of distributed database nodes that are all maintaining a transaction history, right? And the concept of eventual consistency is one where all the nodes are taking in transactions, and what happens is that they end up agreeing on what happened, right? So this is, I'm literally describing consensus, right? So, one of the things that was so interesting is that this technical co-founder, Talib, actually had a great sort of insight when he saw Bitcoin for the first time. It turns out actually he's a Turkish guy, and so the other thing that was happening in his country, in Turkey, was that the lira, the currency, was actually going through some struggles, right? So the Turkish lira has been a sort of a soft currency as opposed to a hard currency, and so I think that hyperinflation was affecting him and his country, and he was actually looking for a government censorship resistant way to send money back to his friends there, right? So this was he got really excited about this, and he basically sucked me in kind of whole hog. So this was probably back in around 2016, and we kind of started a bit of a Bitcoin exchange company at the time, just because we were both really excited about this.
This podcast was possible because of our sponsors, Brave and Unstoppable Domains. More about them next.
Crypto scams are like box of chocolates. You never know which one you're gonna get. Especially if you're using a crypto wallet, which is a browser extension. You run the risk of attacks like phishing scams, account spoofing, data leaks, and theft. The best way to avoid getting attacked is using Brave Wallet. Brave Wallet is the first secure crypto wallet built directly into a browser, so no extensions required. With Brave Wallet, you can buy, store, send, and swap assets. You can even manage your portfolio and NFTs all in one place. Whether you're new to crypto or a seasoned pro, it's time to switch to Brave Wallet. Download Brave at brave.com/web3with and click the wallet icon to get started. You know what's the worst part about crypto? These long and complex wallet addresses. They can get so confusing. I know, you hate them too. What if I told you I replaced my long wallet address with dheerajshah.nft? Yeah, that's my name. All thanks to Unstoppable Domains. They're the #1 providers of NFT domains. With Unstoppable Domains, you don't have to worry about renewal fees because you get to keep your NFT domain forever. You can get an NFT domain as well, maybe a .crypto, .nft.x, or something else. Go to unstoppabledomains.com right now and get your NFTs for as low as $5. Miko, I want to ask you a question. This is my observation. Someone who enters the space, no matter when they enter, the first thought they have is like, hey, we should start an exchange. Is this true? Is this something you have observed? But like you went and did it. It's a very different thing. But like this is just an observation from my side.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's sort of the most obvious kind of business to do. So it's definitely let's do it. It's kind of hard to compete and it's hard to differentiate. So that's definitely the eventual fate of many exchanges. But I would say that just to kind of put a fine point on it. I think that connecting back to my own sort of personal journey, one of the things that I'd been kind of struggling with in my career is, for whatever reason, I fell into a negative pattern of working with kind of I guess I would say sort of a long string of kind of angry foreign bosses, and this tendency or pattern was kind of in some way set in place by my home of origin. So my dad was actually my dad survived World War II, and he was he had when he was a kid, and there was lots of aerial bombing of Japanese cities, namely Osaka. And he lost a lot of his classmates that through this, and I think he had sort of a lifelong sort of struggle with that. But I would say that he had a lot of energy and vitality, and as with many kind of immigrant people who came eventually to the United States, he had a lot of fire in the belly, and I think he had a big passion for I guess just survival, both in the economic sense and the literal sense, and this had kind of become sort of a part of his personality, right? But having lived through sort of a fiery childhood, I definitely, I kind of fell into that as a pattern for myself, right? But after I mentioned, I was going through kind of a period of soul searching. So when my after my dad passed away, I kind of lost the plot. Like I couldn't figure out who my boss was, because in a way I'd been in this negative pattern where my boss was always going to be some angry foreign guy, and I just lost the ability to kind of produce work, and kind of lost the plot. I just didn't know what to do, and eventually, just to kind of so I've been kind of a lifelong Buddhist, and I started looking into sort of spiritual practices, and I came across so Buddhism is sort of a renunciate spiritual tradition, which means that the ideal Buddhist basically eventually becomes a monk, and sort of leaves society, and this is a very impractical thing for me, so I eventually kind of got interested in the roots of Buddhism, because it turns out that the original Buddha was like an Indian dude, so I started studying more Indian philosophies, including Yoga Sutra and Bhagavad Gita. So I started studying Indian philosophy, and I eventually kind of came to the conclusion that my boss wasn't actually like a human person on Earth, but really was my own personal nature, as well as kind of universal nature, right? Which is what the world is trying to do. So this is kind of part of my kind of personal journey. And so when I looked out into the world to figure out what it is that the world was trying to do, and in a way the world seemed to be trying to sort of free itself financially through mechanisms like Bitcoin and blockchain, right? So this is something that nature was providing, so I looked at Bitcoin and saw it as something that was sort of almost a force of nature, and so I decided that Bitcoin was going to be my boss from now on. So that's kind of part of my own strange personal journey.
Wow. Wow. I didn't realize how deep you would go into this, and I love and first of all, thank you for sharing about your father. And I love how resilient we get when we go through these hardships, which I think prepares most of us for whatever battles we have to fight in future. So that's thank you for sharing that. And how I just want to ask you, because how does it feel to be a Buddhist in a crypto space, right? Because the philosophy is quite different, and now you say Bitcoin is your boss. How does that feel differently when you were just working for someone who's always shouting? And I do want to get into the topic of just being non-American in the tech space later on after this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, it's one of the things that is an incredible sort of superpower is, it derived from, meditative practices, which is equanimity, right? So one of the things that's very interesting from a Buddhist perspective is, the kind of the market, right? So the market kind of goes up and down as it does, right? And in a way, like, um, if you think about this from a Buddhist perspective, like, there's a couple of things that happen right before the historical, Shakyamuni Buddha received enlightenment, right? Which is, he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, right? And the two things that happened was there is a demon, Mara, right? And Mara sent his armies and said, "Hey, I'm going to destroy you." So his armies attacked the Buddha, and of course, the attacking armies of Mara were, kind of a distraction, right? So the Buddha was like, "Hey, not now. I'm meditating peacefully," So the armies were not able to destroy him, And then the other thing that Mara did was, uh, sent his, foxy daughters to try to tempt the Buddha, and be kind of very seductive, And so, the Buddha was like, "Oh yeah, I can't be bothered with that either," right? And so, in a sense, the Buddha kind of experienced this sort of, both the greed and FOMO, and also this kind of like, panic, right? So when you think about like the crypto world, there's plenty of greed and FOMO, and there's plenty of kind of panic selling or these kind of things, and in a way, this kind of like profundity of having equanimity is something that I think, it's people talk about Zen. It turns out that sort of culturally and historically, my family, is part of the Zenshu, which is Japanese style of non-theistic Buddhism, and people talk about the Zen, the Zen experience, right? So in a way, I think in the West, it's people. I think people get the vibe, right? People are like, "Oh, you're very Zen about Bitcoin price," or So it's sort of like, yes, indeed, indeed, I am very Zen about that.
Wow. This was awesome. I'm glad. The thing is, I do these spaces not to just talk about like, hey, price go up, price go down, but like get to know people and get to know them in a deeper level. So because like we're humans, under all the posts and investments and whatnot you see, right? Like, so this is what is very interesting to me. I've studied psychology, but like, I mean, I don't do much about it, but like this is something very interesting to me. So I think, Miko, I will ask you a little bit about like, I see a lot of Asians dominating the space finally, which hasn't been the case for a very long time when it comes to tech, because a lot of tech was being originated in the US. But like, again, this is my small observation. I've not seen a lot of the tech industry, but like from the crypto and Web3 lens, what I'm seeing is there is a shift happening from American creators to a lot of Asian, European not as much, but Asians have like, be it Indians or like anywhere, like Korea, Japan, whatnot, right? Like people are building stuff, and it's just crazy. What do you think about that? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is. I definitely am seeing this kind of thing, and it is great seeing kind of leaders like Do Kwon from Korea, or like Sandeep from Polygon. So we definitely are seeing these tremendous kind of Asian technology leaders. Sota Watanabe from Japan built the Astar network on Polygon. That's one of our portfolio companies. So we definitely are seeing, different leaders arising geographically. I think it is part of a global kind of open source movement. And I think it's quite exciting to see.
Yep, and I think what I've seen is like, I'm a bit active in Axie space since like, Geos is like Geo talks a lot, and like he's the public face. I see a lot of people in America just who are Asians, just like go to all these events, and they're super empowered to see representation. Anyway, we'll not get much into it. I want to ask you a little bit questions about how like just about your investments, and how did you get into having a like 500 million fund? How does that happen?
Yeah, so in a sense, like the asset value of the funds, especially if you've been to me, if you're kind of a builder aligned, sort of high conviction, early stage, and sufficiently early in your market timing, if you kind of fit some of these sort of investment properties, like, you can take a fairly modest fund and kind of amplify it, very significantly, right? So in a sense, like this has to do with, that earlier metaphor I was describing of kind of, if you can avoid being emotional about price action, right? Then what you can kind of cut to is sort of potentially the truth about what's happening, right? And the truth about what's happening is really builder aligned, right? So in a way, like venture capital is something that is builder aligned, right? Like if you look at venture funds, the timing on a venture fund is like a 10-year life cycle, right? So in a sense, like, if you look at the timing on a crypto hedge fund, the timing is kind of almost high frequency trading timing, right? So it's sort of like, today, tomorrow, the next day. So it's super mercurial, right? But if you look at a venture fund, venture funds basically just, they're very steady and builder aligned, right? Because, this 10-year cycle is very much sort of like you have time enough to build. So I think we are seeing, despite the fact that we're seeing kind of sell pressure, broadly in the markets, what's interesting is the amount of venture capital that we're seeing arriving in the space now, right? So, in terms of like thinking about this, I guess the way I would reason about it is that, I think if you put the world's best surfer on a flat ocean, nothing will happen, right? But if you put a reasonable person on a pretty good-sized wave, then you'll get an interesting looking show, So I would say that, like, we definitely were in a good right place at a good right time, and I think, we made about sort of 35 we wrote about 35 checks out of our fund one, which was about a $21 million fund. And, that if you multiply that by, 20 or so, you start to get bigger numbers.
That's awesome. And I would just like to know, what is your investment philosophy? Because I think you are a bit philosophical person. So, what's your macro perspective on, how do you go about investing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of early stage investors. We're high conviction, kind of value adding. So for us, like, we just look for amazing entrepreneurs. We call them Gumi corns, and in a sense, like, you find these characters along the path, right? Like Gabby Dizon from YGG. Gabby and Beryl and Owl as well. I'd actually not met Owl since he's an Anon, but like I'd met Gabby and Beryl. I've known them for some years. So when you meet the really strong entrepreneurs, in a sense, like, the philosophy becomes, you just really want to back them, especially if they've sort of found their mission, right? So when you talk about kind of connecting individuals' nature, with universal nature, one of the things that was happening with YGG is kind of this amazing narrative around play to earn gaming in the Philippines. If you haven't seen the Play to Earn Gaming in the Philippines documentary on YouTube, you can just go to there and search for Play to Earn documentary, and you can watch to really deeply understand the universal nature that YGG was connected with, right? Which is, really families, largely in the Philippines, surviving COVID and, having a need for, a really a lifeline, a way to kind of like engage in the internet in a purely digital format that can help them, even, survive economically, right? So, if you look at kind of the idea of problem, right? So the most important part of every pitch deck. So the biggest slide is the team slide, but then the next thing to look at is the problem solution dyad. So the problem solution dyad it's two slides, the problem and the solution ideally, right? And you look at that and you say, okay, well, how serious is this problem? And obviously, in the case of the problem solved by Axie Scholarship, the problem was, I'm not sure my family will have food or a house or a roof over their head. So that's a serious problem, right? And the solution of providing Axie scholarships is extremely innovative, and obviously aligns to this explosive power delivered by blockchain technology. So obviously, we're blockchain purists. So for us, we're really looking for that incredible advantage that's conferred by the emergence of the technology, right? So we feel like the play to earn space has that kind of like incredibly disruptive and explosive ability to help, right? But to me, when you look at YGG, it's like problem, team, solution. It's really incredible. I mean, so we saw this almost the same meta pattern with things like Celsius Network. I was a 2017 pre-ICO advisor there, eventual venture investor. We saw the same pattern with OpenSea, with Alex and Devin. Obviously the problems that they were solving were perhaps seemingly a little less existential than YGG, but we actually understood the sort of future of this space, the NFT space, as being about sort of permanent digital objects, and we saw that there was kind of a desire. So in the case of something like YGG or something like a Celsius or something like an OpenSea, one of the things that you have to kind of understand from a logical perspective is whether the market wants there to be a single large one. An example that we didn't invest early was something like a chain link, right? But that's another example of something where the market wants there to be a big one. Right. And not all markets behave this way. Right. So when you analyze these types of opportunities, you have to think like, is it logical that the market wants there to be a big one of these? And from like a YGG perspective, we think of a guild as a form of labor union. And so if you look at large labor unions like United Auto Workers, right, like what they do is collective bargaining, right? So the collective bargaining power of a guild is dependent on its size, right? So nature wants there to be a large one, right? And so we so part of it is looking at things like founder ambition, right? Because if you talk to a founder and say like, do you even want to be the large one? Then if they don't even want to be the largest one, then it's hard for them to become that, right? So obviously founder ambition is important. But it also has to be in a market that has that property, right? Because some markets just want to be hyper fragmented, and there's no real reason why, there should be a single clear winner. DeFi is going through a lot of that right now. A lot of the DeFi projects are going through, hyper fragmentation.
Yep, that makes sense. Miko, I want to ask you about the founders you invest in. I think because that should play a big part. So what do you see in founders from OpenSea, from YGG, from let's say 1inch or Celsius? What do you see in these guys? First they've gone and become unicorns, and you have invested in them? What are some unique characteristics that you have found in these investors, maybe before investing or after investing? I just want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and by the way, like some of the ones that you've named, they are kind of the obvious portfolio bellwethers, but in a way, like we're not strictly restricting ourselves to sort of serial unicorn scale founders. Obviously, Alex Mashinsky is probably the most extreme example. I think he's currently working on his fourth unicorn outcome, and he's he's going to probably spin out, generate more of those. But I would say, like, if you were to look in our portfolio for kind of unique characters and characteristics, like, I would note Amy Wan, who's sort of a first time venture underrepresented sort of CEO. She executed like an extraordinary pivot from a smart contract mediation framework, that we made a founder bet into, and now she's running, Bling Financial, which is I think a 7.5 million registered user play to earn network. So it's probably the world's largest, casual mobile play to earn ecosystem. So that's an amazing story. Another one is another underrepresented first-time founder, venture-backed founder entrepreneur is Suruchi Gupta. She runs the Giant Protocol. She's definitely one to watch, and she was somebody who I met her, and within the first meeting, I was excited to write a check, even though she hadn't really had much, it hadn't even really done much in the way of incorporation or anything else, right? So we definitely run kind of the gamut, but I would say that one of the key ingredients becomes conviction, right? So when you think about conviction, it's one of those things. The other day I was actually in Europe talking to a founder, and he said, "Oh, I have this really wonderful company, and it's profitable and it has all these employees. We're going to do blockchain, and I'm going to be the CEO of both companies, this new company, in Estonia or Lithuania, and I've got an existing company, in Poland, and I basically told him the structure wasn't investable, right? And the reason why is, when Cortez came to the New World, he told his men to burn the ships, right? Because, in a sense, like, that's a conviction. That's conviction, right? So in a sense, like, we invest in founders who kind of have to make it work, right? Like they don't have a backup plan. They're not hedging, like we're hedging, so like investors hedge, right? Like if basically this is all coming straight from Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, like I'm a little conflicted because Peter Thiel kind of has, I would say, sort of problematic activities around, kind of authoritarianism and things. But I would say that like his book is good, and his portfolio has been good, and so, but Peter Thiel has this concept of investors, diversify. So his whole thing is that investors don't know what to do, right? And founders are the ones that know what to do right now. So if you look at it that way, then a founder is someone who has kind of extreme conviction, right? So so in a sense, one of the tells that we can get when we look at situations, we had one founder that said to us, "You have to tell me if you're going to write me a check by Friday, or I'll accept the job offer that I have from Facebook," right? And for us, we were like, go to Facebook, right? Like, if your conviction on the thing you want to do is so low that, you would rather work for a big company, then you should definitely do that, because like, with that level of self-conviction and conviction around your idea, like you won't make it anyway, right? So to me, like, we definitely have that. So we look for founders that that, and it's fairly complex too. We have one very successful founder, who I won't mention too much detail, but they had a kind of a little bit of a complicated background, and in a sense, like that was a situation where it's like, okay, well, this next thing they work on has to work, right? Like this is sort of a path of redemption, right? So it isn't that every person is perfectly pedigreed and they've done everything in their life perfectly, right? It's really that they have ultra high conviction. I think that's sort of the strongest gating factor. Now, obviously, people can have an insane level of conviction and maybe no skills or or some other kind of character defects, and that makes them unsuitable. But I would say that and there are some people with insane conviction that are just insane, so that's obviously not the whole picture, but it's such a large ingredient. It's such a significant ingredient, and obviously conviction and I think ambition is another significant ingredient.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, Miko. Okay, I have a question which I don't think a lot of people would have asked you, but I'm curious. I think I know the answer, but it's better for the world to know. So you, as a VC, you have your own podcast where you go and interview people. Um, why do you do that?
Yeah. So Miko Bits, which is the name of my podcast, it's on miko.com/bits, is really got started during COVID, right? And one of the things that happened was I was sort of missing the kind of hallway conversations, that I used to get going to physical conferences, right? So conference season has restarted, and COVID seems to be on the numerical decline. But I would say that so what I wanted to do is kind of make these sort of private industry insider conversations, into a public good, because in a sense it's sort of like an open source content right now. The thing that's kind of fortunate for me is that I have kind of a sufficient venture capital business, so that I don't depend on a podcast for any economics, right? So I think for me, my goals are pretty simple, which is really just and it turns out that having such an instrument is really handy, because you can pretty much reach out to anybody in the industry and say, hey, let's have a conversation, and if you spend 40 minutes on a Zoom call with somebody, talking about subjects you're mutually excited about, you can kind of become friends. So I think it's been great for that.
That's good to know. And you also have fun, right? Why while doing this. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of part of the idea that roots back to what I was describing earlier about kind of essential nature, which is that I kind of determined, I think early on actually in my career, I was the chief developer evangelist for the Java language way back at the beginning of my career, and this was I think a super fun time for me, and very it's sort of a successful thing, moving from not very many developers to many millions of developers worldwide. So I think that was a very exciting time. And so when I kind of come back to my essential nature, I think I'm like a technology enthusiast. I'm sort of a natural technology enthusiast. So for me, this, having a vehicle like this is really just an expression of my natural enthusiasms. So so if I get excited about something, I just want to talk with people about it and learn about it, and if I can get really interesting people to talk to me, then I'm happy as a clam.
Awesome. And I think this is the same thing I'm doing, right? Like, so instead of, I used to do podcasts, but like I did it for a company, and then I realized I really love this, right? Like, I really love talking to people, just understanding them and talk about the same nerdy shit we both like, or just learn about completely new things which we would never think about. Because when do you go and really think like, hey, I need to learn about um like something, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, so this is a good way for me to do it. And again, I don't make any money out of this. I just do degen, DeFi and NFT shit to pay my bills, which I'm being good at. And I think this also helps, just talking to people like you and a lot of people, just understand how they think as industry, and that also helps me make decisions in a manner which is helpful, right? Like, so like one of my first interviews was like, we did it with Geo's Axie Infinity. I really loved that project, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. But like, once I spoke to Geo and interviewed him, I went all in and bought like AXS token at like 15 cents, 30 cents, $1, whatever, right? Like, for months I did that. Like, whatever my salary came, I just bought it, because like sometimes you just know. So like that's the idea. And like, because of like, talking to these people, you get a lot of knowledge, which again, they don't tell you, but like, you have to infer from all these conversations, like, what does it really mean? So I love doing this, Miko, and like, thank you for coming and doing this as well. I have one more question. I just heard you talk about the like about literature and books when it comes to, and like, you read books which are old and like, have stayed on for years. Is that something you do? And like, would you like to like talk about that? And like, how does the Lindy effect come into play?
Yeah, I would say like since college, I was obsessed with Homer, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I think it's been I definitely I like the thing that I like about kind of durable literature, which are these really really old books, is that pretty much the ones that we know the names of today are survivors of this kind of mimetic evolution, right? So if you go back to Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, that's where he invented the word meme, right? So everyone in NFTs is all excited about memes, so Richard Dawkins invented the word meme. And if you think about old books, right, like if you go back to, I was talking about how, the Buddha was probably a Vedic scholar, right? Is if you go back to the Rig Veda, we were talking about, literally thousands of years old, right? So the thing that's exciting to me is that, how can a book be durable for that amount of time, right? And still be meaningful, right? So in a sense, like it's the winner of this mimetic evolutionary survival, right? So obviously, the texts that come through to us from ancient times, are filled with kind of wisdom about what it means to be human, right? And I think, to me, like, one of my things that I've been, most excited about lately is trying to think about sort of, not only can the species sort of prosper, not only can it survive, but can the species prosper, and to me, I definitely, I don't want to be naive about it, but I place my hopes on the technology. And the reason why is because I feel like the technology has the property of exponential advancement, right? And it has an evolutionary matrix that isn't dependent on sort of individual survival, right? And I feel like humans kind of have individual and tribal survival, which ends up being kind of a justification for, atrocity or war or, very evil behaviors, because we just have to we tell ourselves, well, we just have to survive, right? And if we have to survive, then we can do anything, right? Like if you tell yourself that you have to survive, you can justify any behavior, which and you can invent stories, right? You can say, oh, well, the opponents that we're facing are devils, and they're not even humans, so we can do anything we want, and of course we have to survive, right? So in a sense, like, this negative tendency is something we have to outgrow, and these are the tendencies that come through as we kind of study the books that come through from ancient times, right? Which is that we've always been like this, as far as history is a guide. And then the question becomes, like, how can we improve, right? And so, if you think about the emergence of exponentially evolving technologies, we can potentially see if there's a mechanism through which we can arrive at kind of a recombinant consciousness, and we can start to kind of maybe have different emergent behaviors. So I don't know. It's definitely a challenging time to be optimistic about technology, and I definitely have bad days. Just reading about the terrible things going on in the world. But I think in a way, like human beings have to have hope in something, or else it becomes kind of very grim. So for me, I'm hoping that we can make a difference using technology. I personally think that one of the most decisive technologies for human freedom and peace will actually end up being fusion energy. So I think having a near unlimited clean source of energy will actually be more important for human civilization than blockchain or anything else. But I just happen not to have a degree in physics and be particularly useful to that industry. But I would say that, like, there are, I don't know, I mean, we have problems, and if I were to make a fiction book recommendation, I would recommend Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which is kind of the spiritual successor to The Martian. And I think his vision of the future is one where people solve incredibly hard problems, and that in solving these incredibly hard problems, they kind of ensure not only their own survival, but things like species survival. So I think it's a very exciting way of looking at the world, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I've just pinned a video which, like, my friend here, Deep Fried Neurons, he covered, like, what is a meme, and like the origins on, like, how the memetics and like how the idea spread, which Miko talked about, like, origins in Richard Dawkins and whatnot. So it's a very good video. If you guys want to learn more about it, you can check it out. Also, Miko, I just want to ask you, like, I have a bunch more questions. Like, do you have a hard stop at 60 minutes, or are you okay to talk a bit more?
I think I have to run off in about 7 minutes.
Awesome. No issues. So I'll quickly ask you a question. Let's say I am a traditional VC or an angel investor who has not worked in a Web3 space, right? Like, how does one go about it? Like, how does one start investing in crypto companies?
I think one of the thesis points I have around this actually is that Web2 investors actually kind of have a lot of what it takes, right? Because they have a kind of a nice Rolodex of Web2 founders. I think in a way, like, because the infrastructure is so beautifully well built in blockchain, I would say that, like, we have kind of a ways to go. I would say custody is still difficult. I would say that, like, we still have, like, a bunch of solutions that need to be built around things like the trifecta of sort of performance, decentralization, and security. Right. So, we do have miles to go on the infrastructure side, but I think we're reaching kind of a wonderful tipping point where the scarcity won't be the infrastructure, right? That the scarcity will be actually on the application side, right? So, creating beautiful, useful, powerful applications that people want to use and enjoy, is actually going to be the scarcity as we move from the era of infrastructure into the era of applications, right? So I feel like traditional VCs actually have a nice situation coming. So, obviously we still have more infrastructure to build, but, I think that the era of, so-called Web3 is going to be application driven.
Awesome. Thank you for telling us that. And quickly, like, I just want to ask you, maybe like I'll just pick a question which you can quickly answer. What is your just ideology on like play to earn gaming, right? Like you have a big thread, uh, and it's some time since you've written that. Have your thoughts changed, or do you still think on the same line? Are you still bullish on play to earn, or like play and earn games?
Yeah. If you go to my Twitter profile and see the pinned post, it is a thread about play to earn gaming, and it's about in-game economies. And to me, like I definitely continue to be sort of ragingly bullish around the emergence of virtual economies. And I think gaming has been the kind of place where people have been able to sort of engineer meaning and engagement and kind of largely sort of dopamine based, but like it's very much kind of like excitement, and it's certainly a super important layer of this kind of metaverse, right? So I don't like the word, but if gaming is definitely a key plank to creating a digital worlds that have value. So I would say that like to kind of put a capstone on the play to earn gaming thesis, right? If you think about play to earn, playing to earn is really capturing maybe like a small subset of players, and I would call these players kind of time investors, right? So I think that's what YGG and Axie have kind of pursued, are people who are investing their time, and I think as an on-ramp into crypto, right, there's probably about I think by the end of the year, we'll be at about 8 billion humans, about 5 billion internet connected humans, and probably nearing close to 4 billion gamers of various stripes. So 54% of which are Asia based, the majority of which are mobile based, right? So I think from our perspective, we definitely see crypto gaming, blockchain gaming as being kind of a huge on-ramp, and it's an on-ramp to financial services. So, I think that the mobile game user numbers will be very large, but I think the lifetime customer value will be also very large, because it's not just about entertainment, it's about financial services. So, we see, that's going to be, I think, a really big area.
Awesome. That's a great take. Okay, Miko, last one question. Let's say I am a person who's building something in the Web3 space. How do I reach out to you? How do I reach out to Gumi Crypto, for raising some money for my company? Like just a general question.
Yeah. It's we're pretty easy to approach. If you're approaching any VC, I would strongly kind of recommend coming through sort of a warm intro. If you want to throw something, over the transom, like LinkedIn or Twitter DM, like DMs are open. So, I'm definitely happy to receive, any, random unsolicited pitches, but I would say that like the warm intro is probably the best. So if you can network to my inbox, you'll probably get better results. That's just a classic VC thing.
Nice. Thank you for that advice. Guys, if you enjoy these spaces, feel free to, go and retweet this, tag Miko, tag me, and tell us what did you learn from these spaces. Miko, you have been amazing. I think we took away a lot from here. I want to clip a lot of these things and make these short clips so people hear what you have to say. Today I don't like the turnout was I don't know what's happening. The market going down, it affects the turnout, because last Friday we had around up to 170 people live. Today maybe not as much, but the content was still like whatever you said like was extremely useful, so people can use it. And thank you for giving your time to us. And like if you were
Yeah,
like
yeah.
have
Thanks,
any.
thanks for hosting, and just I think it's quality and not quantity. So really appreciate everybody in the room here.
Yep. And if someone wants to reach out to Miko, like depends on what, like you can reach him out on his Twitter. You can follow him, or you can also go to miko.com to learn more about what he does. I find him really interesting. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And like I see a lot of you sticking around for the longest period of time since we started, so thank you for doing that. That's it guys. Go tweet about us so more people know about what we're doing.
Thanks so much.
All right,
Have a
bye.
great day.